Hi there, this is a presentation that was on Safety Night 2020. That audio capture didn't work very well, so I'm just going to overdub this PowerPoint and post that. This is about what's in the dry bag and how to use compass and radio. So if you only get one thing out of this presentation, I wish it would be that there are 8 hooks in the shed and there are 8 dry bags, and you need to make sure that they're all put back when you're done. So before you close the shed, look at all those hooks. If there's any empty, that means there's a dry bag still in a canoe someplace, and that happens all the time, and then they disappear. So we want to make sure that they're all put back, and that also the radios are taken out and put in the radio pockets so that they can dry out. And that's why we have a little window on the bag so you can quickly check to see if there's a radio in there. Okay, so what's in the dry bag, or should be in the dry bag? It's all these things here. There's a first aid kit for minor first aid. There should be a whistle in case you need to make your location known in deep fog, call another canoe, whistle for safety. Should be a cutting tool for cutting, fishing line if you get tangled in any number of things. Thermal blanket for hypothermia. The CPR kit for those who have been certified CPR, can perform CPR. There should be one quick strap for emergency lashing, as well as a chunk of rubber for the same. One roll of the thin Gorilla tape for any number of things. And then a compass and a radio. In the first aid kit is just your basic first aid, band-aids, things like that. Nothing too serious here, just for, minor first aid. Anything major, you definitely want to get on the radio and call for Harbor Patrol or call 911 on your phone. So how do you work the compass? Well, it's pretty straightforward. You align the needle, which is going to be pointing towards magnetic north, with the north symbol on the compass, and that tells you what direction you are going. Is that true or false? I'll give you a second to think about that. Yeah, that's actually false. The compass tells you what direction you are facing. That's called heading. You might be going a different direction, which we call course, due to lots of different reasons. Current, swell, wind could be pushing you sideways, backwards, who knows what. But at least, with a compass, you'll now know what direction you are facing in. And from that, now you have your compass aligned, you know cardinal points. You can find what we call a bearing to something. A way to remember this is that you will have a heading and it will have a bearing. So you're finding the bearing to the lighthouse, harbor entrance, who knows what. And if you keep your heading to that bearing, with luck you'll end up at the thing. That's just a fancy way of saying keep facing where you want to go and eventually you get there. But this needs constant adjustment because the canoe is rocking and turning and all those things we just mentioned, current, swell, wind. So you have to keep orienting your heading towards that bearing. Okay, then when do you need this compass? Well, if you can see that thing that you have a bearing to, well, then you don't need the compass. You just keep facing your heading towards that thing you can see and you go there, obviously. But if you can't see the thing, that's when you need a compass and a bearing. Or you can use GPS, which we'll talk about in a second. Why can't you see the thing? Well, obviously, thick fog. It's too far away to be seen. You're in deep swell where you can't keep a good eye on it. Or even it's dark and you can't see it. So when you're exiting the harbor, you're actually pretty much going due south. And I know that might not seem obvious, but remember that we're at the top of the Monterey Bay. So sure enough, as you exit the harbor, you're sort of pointing to the other end of the bay. And as you can see from the compass rose I have on there, it's almost exactly south. So if you're out on the ocean and you need that compass because you can't see a bearing to anything, well, what bearing do you use to get home? Well, if you know that you are pretty much facing south when you leave the harbor, then you know you want to go north to get back to the harbor if you're hanging out in the normal places we hang out. So that'll get you at least, back towards land, which at least will let you get some clues as to where you are. And some of those clues are you start hearing the shore break, you can hear the horns going, you can see birds flying, you can actually smell smells from the harbor or from the wharf. And one thing to mention is that we often, when we're going out normally, we say, do you want to go north or south? And you can see that's just not true at all. What we call north is actually west. What we call south is actually east. I put this slide in here because I thought a few people might be asking, well, what about magnetic versus true, and what about the Great Circle? And I just want to say you really don't need to worry about those in our case. But I'll tell you what they are. So the difference between magnetic north and true north is called declination. And lucky for us, people have mapped that difference out over the surface of the Earth, and you can just look it up wherever you are, and it will tell you what it is. And I've done that for you here. For the entrance of the harbor, the declination is 13 degrees 9 minutes east, which means that the compass points to magnetic north, and it will be east of real north by 13 degrees. And the reason I say that you don't really need to worry about that is that's within your margin of error of just keeping your heading towards your bearing. So you'll get to where you want to go, even if you're off by 13 degrees, given the distances we normally travel. And the second thing you don't need to worry about is the Great Circle, which means if you travel in a straight line for a very long ways, because the surface of the Earth is curved, you won't end up where you thought you were going. You have to follow what they call the run line. But that only comes into play when you're traveling, hundreds and hundreds of miles. So it's another thing you just don't need to worry about. Let's talk about the GPS for a moment. GPS gives you what we call a fix on your position. And I think we all know that it uses the satellites and triangulates, and that's how it works. But it's not really a compass necessarily. I mean, some devices may have additionally a compass in them. Our GPSs don't. They're just a GPS. And so it can't give you a real heading. But what it can do is it can sort of infer that by getting two fixes, a fix of where you were and a fix of where you are. And then you can see from this blue arrow that would be a heading. We don't call that a heading, we call that the course over ground. And the thing to know is that you sort of have to be moving because you need a difference between where you were and where you are in order for it to calculate that angle. You don't have to be moving very far, just 20 yards or so, and it'll be able to give you a course over ground. But if you're just standing in a single spot, depending on the device, it'll either just lock up and not update your course over ground, or the course over ground will just spin around and around and around, even though you're not. Let's talk about the radio itself now. By the way, our GPSs are in our radios. Not all of our radios have GPS, so make sure you look at the label and see which ones do. But all the radios work the same way, and this has been standardized over the years. And you really only need to remember two channels. Channel 16 is the emergency channel, and channel 9 is the general messaging channel that you can just, strike up a conversation with somebody on. All the other channels have reserved purposes by the FCC, and you're not allowed to use them. except channels 68, 69, 71, 72, 78. Those are okay to use, like channel 9. And often you'll go on channel 9, talk to somebody and say, let's switch to channel 69, and then there's less traffic. And you don't really even need to remember those numbers because all the radios have a red button which will toggle between whatever channel it currently is on, 16 and 9. And on the GPS radios, you don't even need to remember that one's emergency and one's general messaging. It has a label that tells you what the channel is for. So I know a lot of you think, I have a cell phone, I'll just take that, I don't need a radio. Well, that's not really good enough. I mean, you can bring your cell phone if you want to, but it's not going to be sufficient, and there's 3 reasons why. The first reason is that cell phones just weren't made for the harsh marine environment. A marine radio, you can drop that in the ocean and pick it back up again, and it'll still work. In fact, it'll even float. The second reason is that cell phones work from terrestrial towers. They don't work from satellites, and so if there's not a cell phone tower near where you are, you're not going to get coverage. And they don't put cell phone towers out on the ocean. I know that I had trouble, getting service on my cell phone, even when I'm just parked on the cliffs sometimes. The marine radio has a pretty large antenna compared to your cell phone, and it has a big battery, and it transmits with a lot more power than your cell phone does. And the third reason is that your cell phone calls one person. I mean, you could call 911 if you have coverage, and now what? You have to tell them where you are, come and get me. The marine radio, everyone listens to channel 16. In fact, it's a rule that if you're underway and you have a radio, you're supposed to monitor channel 16. So there's a boat maybe 100 yards away from you that could come and save you. You're never going to reach them on your cell phone. I have a link to an article here that goes into this in a lot more depth. So here's a picture of what our GPS radios look like. And here's a diagram of all the buttons and what they do. And don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm just going to cover the important ones. So the most important one is the power button, because without that, you're not going to get very far. And I have that marked here in yellow. On these radios, you just hold it down for a few seconds and the power comes on. The next button I want to talk to you about is the distress button, which you can see here in red on the right. And if you're really in trouble and the radio's on, you can open up that little red door, and there's a little button in there, which you'll see in the next slide. And if you hold that for 3 seconds, that will send a distress message with your GPS location to everyone monitoring. That includes Coast Guard and Harbor Patrol. And they will respond to you on a voice channel, and that will initiate a search and rescue. Furthermore, every radio with this capability has a number, sort of like a phone number. And I've registered all of our phone numbers, they're called MMSIs, with the Coast Guard. And so they know that they're 6-person outrigger canoes, and they know, so they, when you do this distress call, they know where you are, they know who you are. You don't even need to say a single word. Okay, the next buttons are those arrow buttons in the middle, which will normally select which channel you are on, and that will show up as the channel number in the display, and the name will tell you what the purpose of that channel is. So you just go up or down till you get to the channel you want, or like I said, you can just punch that red button and it will flip through 16.9 or whatever channel you're on. And then you press on the push to talk button that's on the left, and you just talk. And if you're in trouble, you can say, Mayday, 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 I am at wherever you're at, in distress, whatever your problem is. The next thing I want to talk about on the display is that little circle on the left, which is the GPS lock. When you first turn the radio on, that will be flashing until it's achieved GPS lock. A lot of people think that means low battery. It doesn't. The battery is on the right, and it's just, if the battery's full, it'll be all black, and as the battery goes down, it'll be less like a bar chart, less black. So these radios don't really have any knobs. That knob you see on the top of the radio isn't a knob at all. That's a place to connect an external microphone, so you don't want to touch that. Just leave it, fastened down. The way you adjust the volume is with the arrows, like you do to select a channel, but you push that volume button once, and then the up and down arrows will now control the volume, and it will show you a little bar graph what your volume is. If you push and hold that button, now it will adjust squelch, and I'll explain what squelch is in the next slide. The other button you should know about is the display button, which is just below the arrow buttons. That controls what display is showing, and there's 6 different displays which we'll go through. Every time you push it, it will cycle through a different display. So if this display isn't showing what you see here in this diagram, just keep pushing the button until you see that. This is the distress button I was talking about under the little red door. Obviously, don't push it unless you're really in trouble. So what is squelch? By the way, here's a picture of our non-GPS style radios that we use on small boats. So squelch is used to set a signal level below which the radio won't turn the speaker on. And if we didn't have this, you just hear static all the time. So what you do is you adjust that squelch until you hear a bunch of static. You set it low until you hear a bunch of static, and then you turn it up just a little until the static goes away. Any strong signal will overcome that, and you'll hear it normally. If you set that squelch too high, you might be squelching distant signals, faint signals. So you want to keep it adjusted just at the right spot. In fact, once you set it, once you go underway and signal levels start to get weaker, you might start picking up some static, so you might have to readjust it. I'm going to show you each of the displays that you can select with a display button. This is the one we've been focused on. This is what they call the default display, and this is what it's usually on. It shows you the channel, the battery level, your GPS lock, what transmit power you're on. Normally we'll have them on high power, which is 6 watts, and that we're using frequency selections for the United States, and that the name of the channel, in this case channel 9, which is a non-commercial. This is the second display you'll see. This is called the position display, and this shows you your GPS fixed coordinates. Here you can see 36 degrees 59 minutes, and these display in decimal minutes. They don't show seconds, so it's just minutes with a decimal point. Latitude and longitude. And the 2 numbers on the top, they're 288 degrees. That's your course over ground, and then the next number is your speed over ground. And on the very top is the time and date. So if you forgot your watch, you can always use this to get what time it is. And I want to mention that it still works as it ever does in any display as a normal radio. So you can still push the talk, change your channel, and it's showing you that stuff here as well. The next display is what they call the compass display, which is unfortunate because, as I've already described, it's not a compass. But it does show you the compass rose, and it is computing your course over ground, which it's showing here as COG 288 degrees. And it's going to orient that compass rose so that facing to the top of the radio is your heading. And again, it still works as a radio, and also is giving your speed over ground SOG. The next display is what they call the bearing to target display. And you can use some of those other buttons that we didn't talk about to establish a bearing to a target. And I have pre-programmed in these radios a few bearings, like the harbor entrance and the MBX crossing landing spot. There's a few examples. You can put in more. And if you pick one of those it will then activate this display, which is like the compass display, but you can see that it has an additional little plus sign on the compass rose. And that is the bearing to the target that you have selected. It also is computing that and showing you BRG is the bearing, so to the MBX landing from wherever I was when I took this picture is 171 degrees, and your current course over ground is 120 degrees. The next display is what they call the temperature display, and it just shows you the current temperature. The last display is the GPS status display, and this is really only useful if you're a GPS geek and you can see the satellites that it's currently tracking, their satellite number, and their receive strength. That's it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. See you on the water.